What if I told you that queens, empresses, and royal mistresses were slowly, painfully rotting from the inside out, and no one dared to say why? Behind the glittering crowns and velvet gowns, there was a dark, flesh-eating secret, a disease so shameful it was buried for centuries. And the women who suffered? They were silenced, blamed, and forgotten, but not anymore. Today, we're diving into one of history's dirtiest secrets, a story of power, disease, and denial. 4 women, each with influence, status, and connections at the highest levels of society. Each of them slowly destroyed by syphilis, a terrifying illness that not only ate away at their bodies, but also ripped apart dynasties, destroyed legacies, and left invisible scars on the world stage. Born in 1499, Maria Salviati was a noblewoman of immense pedigree, a daughter of the powerful Medici family, surrounded by wealth, art, and politics during the peak of the Italian Renaissance. She was married off to her cousin, Ludovico de' Medici, a military leader known more for his brutal campaigns than for romantic charm. But along with his battlefield glory, Ludovico brought home something far more sinister: syphilis, a disease spreading like wildfire across Europe, passed between soldiers, prostitutes, and unsuspecting wives. It's believed Ludovico contracted it during his brutal campaigns and infected Maria shortly after their marriage. The symptoms came slowly at first: persistent headaches, fatigue, then ulcers began to form, painful, disfiguring, and impossible to ignore. When Ludovico died young, Maria didn't remarry. Instead, she retreated from public life, cloaking herself in the modest garb of a nun. But this wasn't just mourning, it was concealment. Beneath her robes, her body was changing, the disease was advancing. But Maria refused to waste away quietly. She turned to medicine, studying ancient texts, learning herbal remedies, and crafting her own treatments to mask or slow the symptoms. She became obsessed with healing, not just herself, but others. At the same time, she dedicated herself to one mission: securing the future of her only son, Cosimo I. Under her protection, Cosimo would rise to become the Grand Duke of Tuscany, one of the most powerful rulers in Italy. But Maria wouldn't live to see his full reign. She died at the age of 44, a relatively young age, even for her time. And centuries later, when archaeologists unearthed her remains, they found something chilling: lesions etched into her skull, physical evidence of tertiary syphilis. The final horrifying stage of the disease, when the brain and bones begin to decay. Maria had carried the Medici legacy on her shoulders, and syphilis inside her skull. Flash forward to the glittering court of the Holy Roman Empire, 17th century. Vilhelmina Amalia of Brunswick-Lüneburg was born into royalty and raised to be an empress. But even before she could marry Joseph III, heir to the imperial throne, she was subjected to a humiliating requirement: a fertility examination. Because in this world, a woman's worth was measured by one thing: her ability to produce a male heir. She passed, the marriage proceeded, and at first things looked promising. But Joseph I was not a faithful husband. He was a known womanizer, bouncing from mistress to mistress with little care. And one day, after an encounter with a gardener's daughter, he returned with a silent killer: syphilis. Before long, Vilhelmina began showing symptoms, but rather than suspect her husband, she turned inward, believing the illness was the result of her own impurity, her spiritual failings. She didn't seek treatment. She prayed hard. She begged God for healing, begged for a child, begged for a future. But the infection was already destroying her from within. Her fallopian tubes were ravaged, making conception impossible. She would never give birth to the much-needed male heir. Her body had become a battlefield, and she lost the war. The failure wasn't blamed on Joseph's disease. It was placed squarely on her. Dynastic pressure shifted to Joseph's younger brother, who would go on to father Maria Theresa. Wilhelmina lived on, but not as an empress of triumph. She became a symbol of disappointment, a woman silently suffering from a disease she believed was her fault, when it was actually her husband's betrayal that stole her future. Now, let's leave the palaces behind and walk into the smoky taverns and candlelit brothels of 18th century London. Here we find Sally Salisbury, born Sarah Pridden, one of the most famous courtesans of her time. She wasn't just a prostitute, she was a high-class entertainer, working at Mother Wiseborne's exclusive brothel, where she catered to the powerful and the rich, including the future King George II. Sally had a fiery temper and an even sharper wit. She was bold, brash, and unapologetic. But in 1722, her temper exploded. she got into a furious argument with a noble client, John Finch, and in a flash of rage, she stabbed him. She was arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to Newgate Prison, a place known for death, filth, and misery. But what few knew was that Sally was already dying. She had contracted syphilis before her imprisonment, and in the disease-ridden prison, her condition got worse fast. Even as she received gifts and visits from rich patrons, her body failed. The disease invaded her brain, her nervous system, causing what they called back then brain fever brought on by debauch. She died just 9 months into her sentence. She was only 33 years old, and like so many women of her time, her cause of death was dressed up in shame, not as the tragic result of a society that used and discarded her, but as punishment for being too wild. Several wives of Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, suffered miscarriages and stillbirths. Henry VIII himself displayed symptoms later in life, leg ulcers, possible neurological changes, personality shift, that led to theories he had syphilis. If true, he could have infected his wives, potentially causing their reproductive difficulties. This is a major historical debate. While Henry's symptoms could fit tertiary syphilis, they also fit diabetes, chronic traumatic injury, or Cushing's syndrome. There is no conclusive evidence he or his wives had syphilis. And finally, we meet Lola Montes, a name that shook thrones across Europe and beyond. Born Eliza Rosanna Gilbert in 1821 in Ireland, she reinvented herself as a seductive Spanish dancer. She travelled from country to country, performing, seducing, and shocking society at every stop. Her most infamous conquest? King Ludwig I of Bavaria. She didn't just become his lover, he gave her the title Countess of Landsfeld, made her his political confidant, and eventually his obsession. She wielded so much influence over him that it triggered political chaos, and ultimately forced him to abdicate the throne. But power is fleeting, and scandal is forever. Lola married multiple times. She crossed continents, from Europe to America, leaving controversy in her wake. But behind the drama, something darker was happening. By her late 30s, her health was in sharp decline. She was showing clear signs of tertiary syphilis. Her body trembled. Her memory faded. Her muscles wasted away. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, was vanishing. She died in New York, at just 39 years old, poor, sick, and forgotten by the world she once ruled with charm and scandal. So what do all these women have in common? They were powerful, they were fearless, they were victims of a disease nobody dared to speak aloud. Syphilis wasn't just a medical condition, it was a social death sentence, a silent epidemic that ruined lives behind closed doors, while the world looked away, and while men could spread it without consequence. Women, whether noble, royal, or infamous, were the ones who paid the highest price. Maria, Vilhelmina, Sally, Lola, they suffered in silence. They were blamed, hidden, and in some cases entirely erased from their own history. But the truth still lives in their bones, in their letters, in their legacies. And now, you know it too. If this episode shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe for more disturbing truths that history tried to hide. Which of these stories hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, and don't trust the powdered wigs.